Hello, everyone. We're going to go over some of the big changes of the Gilded Age and Progressive Era. And while the lesson for this week tends to focus a lot on politics, I want to go over some of the cultural things that are going on. So, the first thing we need to do is to look at key terms. I tend to lump the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era into one long period from the 1870s to the 1920s. And there's a reason for this. So when historians define the Gilded Age, they typically say it is the 1870s to 1890s. And it's an era dominated by big business and industry and by income inequality. Okay. So the 1890s to the 1920s then becomes the Progressive Era. And it's an era dominated by big business and industry, income inequality. Well, wait a minute, Dr. Davis, this sounds like the same thing. It is. The reason we call the progressive era something different is because the progressive era is a time where we see a lot more attempts at social and political reform than we saw in the Gilded Age. In reality, I'd argue these are the exact same era, that it is about a 50 years worth of American history. And when we divide American history up, we tend to see changes that occur every 50 years. So this works beautifully within that timeline. So when I talk about a lot of these themes, what I'm talking about is 50 years of history. I'm going to say Gilded Age and Progressive Era over and over because in reality, they're dominated by the rise of business and by the rise of industry and immense income inequality, like I just said. So let's start out by looking at the rise of business. The Gilded Age and Progressive Era are part of what's called the Second Industrial Revolution. So there are multiple industrial revolutions in American history and in world history. The first industrial revolution occurs in the late 1700s to early 1800s. So it's about the 1770s to the 1830s, so right around the time of the American Revolution and onwards. And this is when we start to see the first factories that if we walked into it, we'd be like, yes, this is a factory. There's actually a different definition of factory before this period. So the first industrial revolution leads to some major changes in culture. It tends to focus in on clothing, so the textile industry, and making cotton into affordable cloth that people can use. Now, the second industrial revolution tends to focus more on metals. It focuses more on the creation of steel, for example. It focuses more on the creation of an iron that you can use everywhere. Now, one of the main reasons that the Second Industrial Revolution focuses so much on metals is because of the rise of the railroads. In the United States, railroads aren't anything new by the Gilded Age and Progressive Era. They've been around since the 1820s, 1830s. But what was new was the scope of the railroads. Before the Civil War, railroads were very localized. So imagine traveling from Ada to Oklahoma City or Ada to Durant. It's going to be very localized, and you'll get off, and then you'll have to travel by stagecoach, so a horse and buggy, further, and then you'll catch up with another railroad. Only in parts of the East Coast do we actually have railroads that go longer. So, for example, if I'm living in Maine, I can take a railroad to Washington, D.C., and then in Washington, D.C., take a railroad down to the South. Well, parts of the South, because the South is slowly developing parts of railroads. Now, during the Civil War, there becomes an attempt to join the country through the railroads because railroads take a lot less time to travel. If I'm traveling by horse and buggy between Ada and Oklahoma City, that's about 100 miles, and it's going to take me 2 or 3 days to go by horse and buggy versus a railroad, which will take me an hour to do so. So the goal becomes let's connect the coast. Let's connect the East Coast to the West Coast by railroad so that people don't have to travel by horse and buggy, by horse and wagon, which can take 6 to 8 months to do. But by railroad, we can do it in a few days. And so that becomes the goal. And in the Gilded Age and Progressive Era, the East Coast and West Coast are actually joined together by the railroads. So the rise of the railroads means that we need metals to go with it. We need to build these rails. We can't make them out of wood because they're going to break easily. So with the creation of steel, people are like, oh, perfect. This is just what we need to build railroads, to build trains, etc. And so there becomes a fascination and an obsession with this new type of industry. Now, there are other industries going on. So the textile industry, the clothing industry is still going on. We have the food industry, which is making processed foods at a rate very, very fast. Now, these processed foods actually go back to the 1820s and 1830s, but they're becoming more part of everyday life. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So, the second industrial revolution is driven a lot by metalwork and the railroads. And it leads to a new type of industrialists. So the term that people use and the term that people in the past really used to describe this new industrialist is a robber baron. A robber baron is a person who holds a monopoly. So the robber barons of the period, Gold, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, they would buy various industries and then they would control these industries. So the example I want to give of a robber baron is Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was very, very poor. He grew up let me rephrase. He was the son of immigrants and he grows up to be very, very poor. He starts working in the factories and he slowly worked his way up. Now, Carnegie really he's really smart, is the best way to put it. And so he takes what money he earns and he invests it. So he starts to make it so he can not just work at the factory, he can own the factory. And so he starts to expand from there. Now, Carnegie really focuses in on the steel industry. And because of that, he's influential in the railroads. And so he starts to own more and more steel mills. So if the railroads, which he may or may not own, need steel to build, they got to go to Carnegie. And Carnegie controls the prices with that. He creates a monopoly over it. Now, Carnegie's a little bit different than most robber barons. Most robber barons are just going to take their money and they're going to invest it and kind of keep building, or they're going to use their money to help their families. Carnegie's a little bit different. He feels really guilty about how much money he's made, and he feels guilty that people are struggling so much. So Carnegie ends up trying to take his money and invest it to help people. So one of the ways he invests it is by creating libraries. Libraries, which today are public, anyone can use a library. In the 1800s, libraries were initially private. You had to pay dues to go to the library. And the dues were kind of hefty. It'd be a couple dollars, which in that day and age was a week's pay for people. So unless you were middle class or wealthy, you can't go to the library. Well, Carnegie says, well, anyone should be allowed to go to the library. This is a good thing to go to the library. And so he starts to make free libraries that anyone can go to. You and I can go to, the workers can go to. But there's a purpose to the libraries. The libraries that Carnegie founds, they're not for reading for entertainment. So today, one of the big genres is fantasy, so fantasy romance, and people read that for entertainment, for escapism. Or we have thrillers, these big thrillers that are also a very popular genre today. Well, Carnegie doesn't want any of that in his libraries. The goal of the libraries, according to Carnegie, is to help you become a better person. So, to become a better person, Carnegie believes you need to learn from the people of the past. Okay, so how do we learn from the people of the past? Well, we read their biographies. And you're supposed to be inspired by these great people of the past, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. Or Carnegie says, well, let's have books on how-to books, DIY books, because that's going to help you become a better person, that you're going to learn new skills. So Carnegie is unique in that he takes his money and that he invests it so that people are able to go to the libraries. But again, it's not for escapism. It's more so you can become a better person, so you can better yourself. So it's a different purpose. So the rise of industry in the Gilded Age and Progressive Era is driven on by these manufacturing companies that focus on metal. And we have the rise of robber barons, these men who hold monopolies, such as Andrew Carnegie. Now, the robber barons are very important for the politics of the period, and we're going to see this going through the rest of the class, where the robber barons are so wealthy, they hold a lot of political power. So they're able to possibly bribe political officials. But more importantly, the government goes through multiple depressions, multiple economic downturns in the Gilded Age and Progressive Era. And the robber barons actually bail the government out. So our Andrew Carnegie or Cornelius Vanderbilt is actually going to give the government money and say, hey, here you go. You can keep functioning. You can pay your bills still. So they have a lot of, what's the term I want to use? They have a lot of influence over government policy, which leads to new political movements such as the populists. That will be discussed later on. So with the rise of industry, we have some major changes in society. The number one change is the rise of the trains. And I started talking about this, how the trains are connecting the world. Well, this dramatically changes the structure of American life. So first off, we start to see people have the ability to travel faster. So they start to imagine the world very differently. It used to be, okay, it will take me 6 months to travel from Missouri to Oregon. Well, now I can get there in a few days. And they start to envision their relationship much, much faster with the world versus this long trend thing. People start to travel and they start to do day trips to places. So on the slide, you can see an image. This is from an Oklahoma newspaper. And it says, when are you going? It's time to start thinking about your summer trip. People realize that they can have a day trip or they can go on vacation. And this is a new concept in American history, going on vacation. What? If I'm living in Ada, Oklahoma, or if I'm living in Oklahoma City, I can get on the train and I can go to St. Louis, Missouri. I can go to Kansas City. I can start seeing places. And I'm going to start putting money aside so that I can have that vacation, so I can engage in the sites, so I can eat out, so I can stay at a hotel. People start seeing this idea of vacation as a kind of recreation. It is a new concept for people. And it leads to the idea that we have today. In the summer, we go on vacation. In spring break, we go on vacation. It's a big change. The trains also start to change how people perceive time. Not just how fast you can get someplace, but time itself. There's an issue where the trains are arriving and you'll be at the train station and it'll say arrival 2 o'clock. But the train will arrive at 1 o'clock. And you're like, wait, what? It arrived early? No. The train's coming from a different part, different time zones. So there needs to be standardization, which leads to what we have today. We have time zones, Eastern, Central, Mountain, Pacific, so that when the trains arrive, you know when the train's actually going to get there. It's not arriving an hour earlier, an hour later than you thought. It's arriving when it's supposed to arrive. And the trains require that because they're going through these different time zones. So the trains dramatically change American life. You can travel very quickly. You can go on vacation. You start to have a sense of standardized time that, okay, I'm living in this part of the country. Here's my time. They start to unite the country in a dramatic way. I can't emphasize enough how important trains are to American history from the 1860s onwards. That they're going to be the main source of transportation and the main way people engage with the world until we get to the World War II era. So they're so important. Another way industry changes people's lives is through consumption. What are people buying? Beginning in the 1820s and moving on, people start buying more stuff from outside the home. So typically, you're going to make what you need. You'll make your food, you'll make your clothing. But how you make your clothing is going to change. So before the 1820s, you're going to weave cloth and then you'll make the cloth into clothes for you to wear. Well, with the rise of the first industrial revolution, that cloth that you make into clothes, you're going to buy it because it's being made by factories. So why spend that time weaving when you can just buy the cloth? And it may feel sometimes a little bit cheaper to buy the cloth. By the time we get to the Gilded Age and Progressive Era, more people are actually buying ready-made clothes like we do today. They start to say, well, it's being made at a factory. Why do I need to make it myself? Now, I want to emphasize, not everyone's buying ready-made clothes. Usually this is the middle class and the upper class who buy ready-made clothes. The lower classes are going to buy the cloth and they're going to make it themselves. So throughout this era, we start to see people changing their consumption habits, where they're not making as much at home, they're buying pre-made items. And the great example that I want to give of this is the Sears catalog. So by the time you watch this, I have no clue. Go back. I have no clue if Sears is going to exist by the time you watch this. It's kind of in decline right now. The Sears Roebuck Company was founded in 1892, and it was a ready-made company. So you would get a catalog, similar, this is the 1897 catalog, and you could go through and you could order what you wanted. Kind of like Amazon, but we don't have the internet at this point. But to many people using the Sears Roebuck catalog, it actually kind of felt like Amazon does today. I can go onto Amazon and I feel like I can buy anything from Amazon. And that's how people felt about the Sears Roebuck catalog, the Sears catalogs. Everything was ready-made. You didn't have to make it yourself. So here we can see a wagon, pre-made wagon. So you don't have to make it yourself, or you don't have to go to a wheelwright, a wagon maker. Shoes are ready-made. So you don't have to go to the cobbler to make your shoes or make them yourself. You can buy them pre-made. Hats, clothes, guns, light fixtures, it's all ready-made. This is new in American history. Usually you would go to somebody who would make it for you, or you'd make it yourself. But now all you have to do is write a check, send it off, and you'll get what you want in the mail. Similar like what we have today with Amazon. Mind blown for people. People are just overwhelmed with how much they can get from the Sears catalog. So much so that they go into debt because they just want everything. They're like, I need this, 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 and this. Kind of like how some of us do with Amazon. But this starts to change life. We're not going to the local wheelwright, the person who makes wagons. We're not going to the local cobbler, the person who makes books. Shoes, not books. We're not going to the local milliner, the person who makes hats. We're ordering it. And what we're ordering has been made in a factory. And so people start visualizing this. They don't have to make as much at home. Some still do. They don't. Moreover, how people understand things starts to change. That is very vague. I'm going to narrow down. So today, when we go clothes shopping, we're like, I am size whatever. That didn't exist before. Clothing that was made by you or made by somebody you knew was fitted to your body. There was no standardization. But the clothing, if you're buying shoes or clothing through the Sears catalog, it has to be standardized. There's no way for it not to be standardized. And so this leads to a new type of viewing. You don't see the world as, well, here are my measurements. My bust is this, my hips are this, my waist is this. No, you say, I am size small, medium, or large. It's very standardized. And people start to see the world through this standardization versus an individualism that had come from making stuff on your own or buying it from the people you knew who would make it for you and make sure it fit your body right. So the Sears catalog, it comes out of industrialization because all these goods are factory made. And it changes consumerism, how people purchase their goods, either from someone they knew or making it themselves to now going to a factory made item. And that's an impact of the rise of industrialization. Let me know if you have more questions. We'll be moving on.